Hello and welcome to Efficient Strategy Gaming. Today I want to show you guys a deck that will help you level up to Field Marshal in the game of Cards. So let's get into it here. My name's ESG and I've been playing Cards for about 3 years now. And by no means am I the best Cards player, but this deck gets me to Field Marshal every season without many problems whatsoever. The deck does not have too many elite cards, so it is a beginner-friendly deck. There's a lot of common cards here, and I know what you're thinking. Could I use this deck competitively? And I would say, yes, you can in the current meta. What I've noticed is a lot of control decks, and the way that this works is, let me show you the mana curve here. Everything is front end loaded in the 1 to 2 credit slot. So this deck plays fairly fast. It can also play medium. It's definitely not going to play long. A game that you would get up to 12 credits in your stockpile would be very rare, but I have won this game on turn 9 and 10, and it's very surprising. So let's get into it here, and I'll show you the individual cards that we're using. I'm going to use the SDKFZ 222, and that's for the damage spike that it provides. It's way better to get this card on the battlefield late. Awoken Giant, because if you're against aggro, it's really hard sometimes to get the front line, to establish your front line, and this card helps you do that, as well as allows you to draw a card. And I think that it's so important to beat opposing aggro decks that even if it sticks in your hand and you never use it, it's still incredibly critical to have this card in your deck. The next one is Gaburg's Pioneer. This is not an Alpine deck. We're not going to be using any other Alpine cards, but I could put this down on turn 1 and it gives me an extra credit every single turn. So your opponent has to either delete this with aggro with their own removal spells, or they leave it on the board and then you gain an incredible advantage. So it will draw out aggro if nothing else. And if your opponent leaves this on the board, it combos with your Panzer 35T. So turn 1, you can get it down. It is infantry, and then it combos with Panzer 35T. You put Panzer 35T on the board turn 2, and because it's infantry, you reduce operational cost by 1. And then you have kind of like a fireball coming at your opponent. Moving along here, another critical card in this deck that makes this deck work is Magic. And most of the time you're using this to remove guard. Sometimes with a Japanese aggro deck, you need it to remove Smokescreen, because Japan has several cards that are in the meta that uses Smokescreen. But I would say just one of these. The thing that you want to watch out for is putting too many orders inside of your deck. There are no countermeasures, and that's because this deck has no room for you to miss on a countermeasure. You can't be spending extra credits, allowing time to pass by. You need to be extremely efficient with your build and with the credits that you have, and try to spend as many credits as you can each turn to build your board. This deck is all about board presence and controlling the front line. Okay, the next card is Grief. Allows tanks to operate for 1 credit less, so incredibly credit efficient. You want to play this after you have tanks on the battlefield, because it will get removed very easily by Tora Tora or Desert Rat, or many of the other countermeasures or orders that you'll see in other decks will remove this. So very easy to get rid of, so play it late. Red Devils is credit efficient and basically allows you to get the front line, establish the front line, and then your opponent will have to pay a high cost to remove this. This is an excellent card to have turn 1. Okay, the Panzer 2A here is the backbone of this deck and gives you that 3 HP, so it's going to be harder to remove. You also have Smokescreen, which comes into play very seldomly, so don't worry about that. And of course has Blitz, and you can chunk this out. You could buff it and just start hammering away. excellent card to have to establish board presence for many different levels. Dive bombing allows you the ability to take down big boys that are in front of you that your opponent can get out early, and it sets the attack of the opponent's unit to 0 and does 1 damage. It doesn't seem like it does a lot, but it gives you a lot of utility for this deck where you basically want to win the game by turn 6. Combat Engineers, there's 2 of them. These are rarer cards, so you might not have it. They're not elite, but definitely critical for this deck, because after your units move to the front line, it buffs them 1 attack, which doesn't sound like a lot. It is also in infantry, so it buffs 35T. The next card is Fast Heinz, and it will give your German tanks in the front line a +2 and a +1. I would use this if I have probably like 1 or 2 units in the front line that are going to benefit from it. If you wait to combo it, like having 3 or 4 or 5 German tanks on the front line, it's usually too late. So I would say situationally, you want to have at least 2 German tanks on the front line, but if you don't have a lot of units in your hand, you're probably going to have to play this if there's just 1 German tank on the front line. But this deck allows tanks to move to the front line fairly easily, so there should be an opportunity at some point, unless you just draw all orders or something like that, to use Fast Heinz. The only downside is it only gives +1 to HP. That's my only complaint. I think I'd rather have it a +1, +2 rather than how it is set up, because the thing about this deck is it allows the cards to stay on the board. The Japan deck can get swept fairly easily because a lot of the Japan cards do not have a lot of HP. Conversely, this deck has a lot of early cards that have at least like 3 HP. And then if the unit does not have HP, like the Pioneer here, it has another ability that makes it incredibly powerful. Okay, moving along, we have Heinchel 126 to buff a tank. The other thing you can think about this is, even if it doesn't buff a tank, it defends against bombers, and it only takes 3 credits to put it down and then attack, because it can attack from the back row. So that gives you a little bit more range to your deck, and that's why I like it for the utility. Sunstrike is going to remove early guards and life gain units that you see in a lot of the decks, particularly the Britain deck has a lot of life gain, or the Italian deck has some life gain, and this allows you that early removal so that you can keep the attacks up. Supply shipment, I'd only use 1 of these in your aggro deck, but basically it allows you to buff something on the front line so that it can stick to the battlefield. Use this with caution, though. If you play this and then the card is immediately removed without you doing anything with it, it is a complete waste. So typically, I wait to establish my front line, play this, and attack on the same turn. That way, I at least get some value out of it. I do not play this at the end of my turn because it could be a complete waste of 2 cards. It wastes the unit that I put in the front line, and it wastes this spell. So you have to use this situationally. Rally just defeats pin and gives you an extra card. If I'm up against a Soviet deck that I know that I'm not going to get pinned, I usually just play this when I don't have anything else to play, just to get the extra card. So it does provide some utility. It also gives you a +1 attack. So I do play this early on turn 2 sometimes if I don't have anything else useful to play. Wearable Wind is good air defense. It blitzes out a 2/3 tank, German tank. Synergizes very well with this deck. Goes up against the British Flyers deck or the Japanese aggro like Flyers deck. So it counters that. Panzer 35T is just fireballing out 2x2s here. The Beef Wagon here is kind of controversial because it can get stuck in your hand. So What happens with the beef wagon a lot is if you draw it later and you already have someone in the front line, there's no way to get this out other than just spending the 2 credits and putting it on the back line. However, the fact that you can get this out without spending any credits on the front line makes it critical for this deck, because it allows you to have that damage ramp without spending any credits. So that's why there's 2 of them in this deck. It can be dubious at times, but basically you are waiting for the combos to line up. You're waiting, thinking about what cards you're going to get next so that you can combo. And if you can combo off of this card, it's excellent. The 3.7 centimeter flak has 0 cost. You could establish the front line with it. It's very pesky. You could buff it with supply shipment. So don't overlook this. I just use 1 because it doesn't have that much attack. Infantry battalion buffs your unit on the front line. The infantry regiment gives you much needed draw, and it also draws aggro. Reich Research is used to remove the 3 credit cost units or below. I don't use it for anything else. So you get Flying Bomb. I don't take the other option when I do Reich's Research. Panzer III-F allows all of your tanks to blitz, even the beef wagon. Even if you're playing that on the back line, it still blitzes out, which is great. And it obviously has blitz itself, and it gives all the other tanks 1/1. It's great for utility. It's great for getting tanks to stick on the board. The half track is to remove guards or pesky bombers or air units. It's really good in a pinch. Hellcat can come out and defeat like the armored train that the Soviet has. It could defeat a lot of big boys that you could see on turn like 5 or 6 if you're playing a little longer, and can do quite a bit of damage itself. Blitzkrieg, there are 2 Blitzkriegs in the deck. This, again, could act in your for your benefit or against you. And I'll tell you why. If you like start off the game with 2 of these in your hand, you have a very low chance that you'll win. However, if you draw it on turn 4 or 5, then that's where it really helps out, because you could play it, you could move some units around, and if you draw into both of them, like, you're going to win the game. Just an excellent card. It comes out as a surprise. All the units on the front line, you reduce their cost by 1, so it's credit efficient. Just great all around. You just don't want to draw 2 of them at the beginning of the game. Cadet Nurse Corps gives every unit on the battlefield 1/1 and repairs them. So I play this a lot when there's been some damage dealt to my units from like Tora Tora or something like that. And I've already played Supply Shipment. It'll bring that unit back up. I played it a lot just to give the 1/1 bonus. So it comes in handy situationally, but I would only use 1. It is a rarer card, so you could replace this with like another Hellcat and probably do just as well. So I would say that this card is one of the few cards that you could easily swap out because it's not mission critical for this deck, but it's nice to have. Comet, I have won 3 or 4 games out of like, let's say 20, just because I had Comet. And a lot of the games where I feel like I'm going to lose, I draw a Comet, and then all of a sudden I'm still in the game. I'm still in the game, and then I win the game just because I had this card. So unfortunately, if you're a newer player, you're going to have to spend your elite wild card on this in order to play this deck, because I would consider this card mission critical in the current meta. In other heavy guard metas, this has not worked out, but in the current meta, I believe that this is critical for this deck, and this card makes the deck complete. It makes it competitive to where you could actually play in a tournament. However, some of the mid-range decks that the pros are playing will easily beat this. So I would say if you are a beginning player just looking to rank up to Field Marshal, this deck is the best deck that you're going to get, hands down. This is my deck here. If you want to get the deck list, join my Discord. There's a link to my Discord on the front of my YouTube homepage. And there's a card section in my Discord where you can find the individual components of this deck, copy and paste it so that you can copy what I've done here. I've had many iterations of this deck. I feel that this is the best one. So if this was helpful to you, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.